Welcome to part 3 of my series on all things skill point related. We'll be covering accelerators and remaps this go round. For the other parts, look for the thumbnails at the end of this video. Alright, let's get started. Cerebral accelerators give a bonus to all your attributes for a certain amount of time. They're usually only obtainable through time-limited events, but those have become quite frequent in the past year or so, and I'm hoping that CCP keeps up the pace. Running events is something different to do, but it also has unique and lucrative rewards, such as skins, agency drugs, and the aforementioned accelerators. Moreover, they're often new bro friendly. Accelerators typically come in these flavors and expire about 30 days after the start of the event. Do note, however, that their expiration date only affects when you can consume them and not when they stop working. Thus, I always save my extended accelerators for last in order to get 4 or 5 extra days of boost past the official expiration date. Also, do note that the times listed here assume that you have Biology 5 trained. Speaking of which, train Biology 5. Given how frequent events have been this past year, I wouldn't even wait for the next one to roll around. Just train it and have it ready to go. Don't worry, it's only a rank 1 skill. Anyway, for those that don't know, Biology 5 will double the duration of Cerebral Accelerators. In other words, it cuts your ISK and or time cost in half and gives you a set time every other day to consume the next accelerator. Now, if only CCP would do something to address timer creep. Also, CCP has recently taken to dropping Cerebral Accelerator BPCs instead of the completed item, and it looks like this is going to continue. I know I initially said I was fine with it, but I've since changed my mind. 20 mil in production materials per accelerator is an annoyance to me, but it's kind of cost prohibitive to younger players. Thus, they either have to skip on the accelerators or go mine. And I believe that that's a bad idea because any mechanic that encourages new bros to mine is detrimental to player retention. But I need to get off my soapbox and get on with it. In spite of this recent development, the Cerebral Accelerators usually offer an incredible value when compared to skill injectors. Unfortunately, however, figuring out your best course of action isn't always readily apparent. Accelerator rarity and production material cost can dramatically affect their IS to SP ratio, and your personal SP total will affect the efficiency of skill injectors. Thus, if you want to know whether it's worthwhile to build, use, and or sell accelerators, you're going to have to do your own math for each event. As a general rule of thumb, however, SP farm tunes should always be making full use of accelerators. The bulk of their expense comes from MPTCs, so you want to get as much mileage out of them as you can. Also, the IS per SP ratio for skill injectors starts getting absurd as you move up the penalty brackets, so if you have at least 80 million SP, you should always be boosting as well. And ignore the basics, their bonus sucks. Everyone else can use this chart, but understand that things like inflation, specials, and sales will influence the prices of all these items in various ways. So, once again, if you want to make absolutely sure that you're making the right decision, you'll need to do your own math. Regardless, if you find that the IS per SP ratio of an accelerator is more than what you would get out of a skill injector, sell them and use the proceeds to fund your SP farm or to buy injectors. Also, it occurs to me that many new bros may see the relatively expensive prices of accelerators and decide to sell them. Of course, there are times when the IS per SP ratio will be worse than that of a skill injector, but when it's not, I strongly advise new bros against selling. Well, naturally sell any extras you may have, but be sure to keep your characters boosted for as long as possible. I look at it like instant gratification versus long-term reward. Yes, 500 mil or so cash right now may be rather tempting, but those skill points have value too, and it's usually going to be more valuable than the IS that you're going to get for them. So, unless you're going to turn around and invest that ISK into +5s or skill injectors, you're probably going to be better off just using them. In fact, here's one last chart before we move on. As you can see, even a character under 5 million SP would get a little over a billion IS worth of SP from a +10 boost for 34 days. And a character with more than 80 million SP will get 3.5 billion worth of skill points from that same set of accelerators. And of course, if you have multiple older characters, the IS value of all that SP can easily reach 10 billion for a single event. Alright, that's pretty much everything for accelerators. One final note, however, if we have to keep building accelerators, you can find the PI and other crap at major market hubs for relatively cheap. The bulk of the cost will come from chromodynamic tricarboxyls, so you'll need to figure out whether it's worth your time to mine it yourself or just buy it from the market. Alright, I want to talk a bit about the basic mechanics of skill training and remaps first, and then we're going to get into the weeds with remapping strategies. You'll start with these default attributes when creating a new character, and every skill in the game has a primary and secondary skill that determines how fast they train according to these formulas. And to clarify, that's the primary attribute plus 1/2 of the secondary attribute equals the skill points per minute. And from there, converting to the SP per day, month, or year should be rather self-explanatory. A neural remap is when you adjust your base attributes in order to help certain skills train faster. Unfortunately, that also means that skills that rely on the other attributes will now train much slower. Thus, it's important to do at least a little bit of research and planning before remapping. Also, there are essentially 5 character types when it comes to skill overlap. For example, PvPers, mission runners, ratters, and even explorers are all going to have a huge amount of skill overlap, which allows us to talk about them as a whole when it comes to remaps. Since combat-oriented players seem to make up the bulk of the player base, I'm going to focus my attention on them. However, I will mention other character types where appropriate, and hopefully, players with other character types will be able to extrapolate from there. Alright, remaps can be broken into 5 types. I am going to go into more detail, but real quick, the remaps can be thought of in this way. Default remap should be reserved for new bros. Using Emon to optimize your remaps is generally inferior to what you can do yourself. Thus, it should mostly be reserved for edge cases. Past that, PI, balance, and perfect remaps offer better and better performance, but require more and more planning and effort. So, pick the one that best suits your desires and level of commitment. Alright, the default remap is well-rounded but slow. Its use should be restricted to new players who have a wide range of skills that they need to train. Regardless, they should be trying to move to a more efficacious remap as soon as possible. I call the second type the Evemon Optimize. It's where you throw a laundry list of skills into the Evemon skill planner and hit the Optimize button. It then tells you what attributes you should map for. How effective this method will depend on the diversity of skills that you include in your plan. The less diverse it is, the better your overall training rate will be. The more diverse it is, the more its efficacy will begin to resemble that of the default remap. And on top of all that, it still requires you to set up Evemon and put together a year-long skill plan. Personally, I'm not a big fan. I mean, why go to all the trouble when you can end up with mediocre results? If you're going to do something, you might as well do it right. That being said, it can still be useful in certain situations, which I'll point out as we get to them. The PI remap is designed for combat-oriented characters and can frequently be seen accompanying doctrine skill plans, which typically include specific ship and weapon skills and a host of support skills. Naturally, the skills in these plans have different primary and secondary attributes. However, weapon and T1 ship skills have perception as a primary attribute, and many support skills have intelligence. Thus, the skill queue benefits greatly from a remap that favors those attributes. Compared to a default remap, many skills will train at about the same rate, but all those weapon and T1 ship skills will train a respectable 18% faster. That sounds pretty good, right? Well, the problem is one of opportunity cost. The exact numbers will depend on the specific skill plan being trained, but a reasonable estimate is that this strategy will net you about 1.7 million SP per year over the default remap. In comparison, balanced and perfect remaps will get you an extra 3.1 and 3.9 million SP respectively. So it is a suboptimal strategy, but it does provide a respectable boost, requires no planning, and it's less restrictive, meaning that you won't be heavily penalized for training a rather wide range of skills. Thus, I do consider it a good option for more casual players and anyone else who doesn't want to run an SP farm. And do note that you don't need to follow a doctrine skill plan in order to use this remap. Of course, the attributes of skills in each category can vary greatly, but as a general rule of thumb, green categories will benefit significantly from the PI remap, yellows will train at about the same as a default remap, and reds will suffer greatly. So stick to the greens and yellows, basically all the stuff on the left, and you'll come out ahead, which shouldn't be too much of a problem considering this covers most of what you want. As for what isn't covered, Fleet support can be trained with injectors or ignored and left to other players. Neural enhancement, however, probably shouldn't be ignored. Fortunately, you don't need to invest a lot of SP into it early on. Cybernetics 5 is a bit of a beast, but the other critical trains are relatively short. Personally, I recommend knocking out your neural enhancement skills before doing a PI remap, but you can also use about 3 injectors to get it done. Alright, balanced remaps are when the primary and secondary attributes for a class of skills are both set to 24. This is opposed to the perfect remap, in which the primary is set to 27 and the secondary to 21. While perfect remaps can provide the absolute best training rates, balanced remaps come pretty damn close and don't require ridiculous amounts of planning. First, you don't have to bust out with EMOD to figure things out. Just remap perception and willpower if you are combat oriented, or intelligence and memory if you're an industrialist. That being said, newer players will probably want to spend some time with the default remap working non-map skills. For example, if you're a combat-oriented new bro, you'll probably have bad support skills and a low income. Since you can't train all those intelligence and memory support skills with injectors, you should spend 3 to 6 months heavily working them in order to get them up to 4. Then do a balanced remap and switch focus to ship and weapon skills. Conversely, an industrialist new bro should consider working trade and hauling before remapping to focus on production and science. And assuming you're not a filthy casual, you should be able to comfortably support an SP farm sometime within your first year and be able to continue working all those non-map skills with injectors. Anyway, miners will have a lot of memory and intelligence-based skills, but those looking to fly an ore command ship will end up with a rather wide range of skills. Thus, they might be better off sitting down with Emon and planning out a perfect remap. Besides, they'll have plenty of time to do so while mining. Also, I haven't tinkered with any trader-specific plans, but I'm speculating that this one would be the best route for them. A split between charisma, memory, and willpower might be a good starting point, but in this case an Emon optimized remap might get better results. Finally, SP farms should always do perfect remaps in order to get the most mileage out of their MPTCs. Or plexes. Anyway, balanced remaps are a little less restrictive than perfect, which means you don't have to sit down with Emon trying to figure out what your best course of action should be. For example, if you train an equal amount of T1 and T2 ship skills, a balanced remap of perception and willpower will ultimately get you about the same amount of SP as a perfect remap to the same attributes. However, because T1 and T2 ship skills have inverted attributes, you'll actually do better or worse with a perfect remap depending on whether your skill queue biases towards T1 or T2 ship skills. Of course, the problem can be avoided by making a plan with Emon, or you could just roll with a balanced remap and call it a day. So, once again, balanced remaps aren't quite as effective as perfect ones, but they're much more friendly to casuals and people who are prone to skill queue tinkering. Oh, and do not passively train non-map skills after the remap. This isn't like the PI remap, it will really drag down your long-term training rate. Instead, you'll want to use skill injectors to work your non-map skills. Of course, you can buy injectors off the market, but that will cost you in the long run. Thus, you're far better off supporting balanced and perfect remap tunes with a supporting SP farm. And if we want the absolute best results possible, we'll want to go with perfect remaps. Do note, however, that extra 3.9 million SP is a theoretical maximum. It assumes we only train the skills that have corresponding primary and secondary attributes. Every skill that we train that doesn't fit our specific remap will cause our overall training rate to suffer. Thus, in order to get the most out of the remap possible, we need to plan ahead. That means planning out a long-term skill queue in Emon, and as previously mentioned, using skill injectors to work non-map skills. Oh, and of course you'll need the discipline to actually stick to the plan. Thus, this remap is best reserved for more hardcore players who know exactly what they want and dedicated alts such as Titan and SP farm tunes. Once we've decided that a perfect remap is what we want, we'll need to import a character into Emon. I'm not going to cover that or any of the other nuts and bolts of the program, but I will explain the procedure for how a skill plan can be made and optimized using a Titan alt as an example. Oh, and I'll also cover SP farms in more detail in part 4. So, in our hypothetical situation, we want to make a Titan alt from scratch. We'll be starting a brand new character and putting him on his own account. We also have enough extra ISK coming in that we can keep him supported by one SP farm character without burning ourselves out. We also plan on posting this toon up until he's ready to go. We won't be using him for scouting, Cynos, PI, or anything else that might slow our progress or complicate this plan. And if we're going to do this, we might as well do it right. So we're going to make sure that he can fly the ship competently and not just be able to sit in one. And finally, we want to pay the smallest cost in terms of time, money, and effort in order to get what we want. Alright, so what does all this stuff mean for our plan? Well, first off, we have one clear overriding goal: to make a Titan alt. Since we know exactly what we want, we should have no reservations about using our bonus remaps. Our goal is also a long-term one. We're not going to be using this toon for anything that will require additional training in the interim. This makes planning easier, avoids delays, and means that we can do some unbalanced training. What I mean by that is that we can safely postpone certain skills without having to worry about ISK efficiency or PvP performance. For example, we can focus on training all of our tanking and fitting skills to 5 right off the bat and kick the ship and weapon skill can down the road until after we've remapped for perception and willpower. Okay, I know I haven't talked about this next one, but it is actually possible to train an alpha account faster and for less money than an omega if you keep them flush with daily skill injectors. And on top of all of that, those SP are unallocated. The drawbacks are that we'll be restricted to alpha skills during that time, and that it can complicate the planning phase. And once we finish with the alpha phase, we'll switch to an omega subscription in order to maximize our training rate and unlock all the omega skills. And I didn't want to get into this, but I probably should. So real quick, if you house 2 characters on one account, you can use MPTCs to train that second character. They are cheaper than Plex if you're paying with ISK, but more expensive than a subscription if you're paying with cash. Second, you get all or nothing omega. So, say you want to train an alt for a specific task, like ganking in a catalyst, and then that's it. You can use MPTCs to train him up and then not have to worry about him anymore. As long as you keep your primary character omega, the whole account will be able to use omega equipment and skills. A second account will allow you to temporarily train an alpha for quicker and cheaper than an omega can train, assuming you can keep him fed with daily alpha injectors. Subscriptions are also cheap. If you're going to pay with money, you definitely want to use a subscription to do it. Third, and this is a biggie, you can dual box. This will allow you to dual box PvE content in order to increase your ISK efficiency, post up a scout while ratting, provide your own Cynos, web freighters into warp, and so on. You can also swap characters between accounts for $20 if the need arises, but I've already spent enough time on this, so I need to move on. Alright, since we're planning on supporting our Titan alt with a skill point farmer, we'll be able to easily train non-map skills. Thus, we won't have to worry about remaps taking the training rate for other skills that we need. Naturally, this offsets the biggest disadvantage of balanced and perfect remaps, making them excellent choices for our needs. However, since we're willing to do the planning required, we're going to maximize our training by going with the perfect remap. Next, since we want to fly our Titan competently, we will be training relevant skills to 5 and spending a fair amount of time at each step. Thus, we can assume that we'll be able to do multiple remaps without having to worry about whether or not we'll run out of things to train before we can remap again. And finally, we will minimize the time, effort, and money required to realize our goal by planning first and then acting. Things like research, checklists, and sleeping on any big decisions will help to avoid later face palms. Alright, I consider the first step to be the most critical one. We need to be absolutely sure that we make a complete list before proceeding, or else we'll run the risk of paying for it later. If we're not an expert, we should probably find and consult one. And even if we are, it wouldn't hurt to get another pair of eyes on our list just to make sure that we didn't forget anything. In fact, it's not a terrible idea to have a few people review our list in order to greatly diminish the chances of anything falling through the cracks. Something else that will help us is Evemon. If we add top-level skills, such as Galente Titan, it will automatically add all the missing prerequisites. Unfortunately, it won't add odds and ends such as signature analysis or jump drive calibration, so we need to make sure we get them ourselves. Once we have a complete list, we can see a rough estimate of how long it'll take to train. And do note that in my case, I didn't import a brand new alt, but created an alpha clone within Evemon. I was able to create a +5 implant set for him, but I couldn't find any way to set him to an omega training rate. Regardless, This problem is easily solved by dividing the training rate by 2. In this case, we get 768 days. With yearly remaps available at 0, 365, and 730 days, we could conceivably use 3 yearly and 2 bonus remaps. This provides us with our theoretical maximum, but accelerators, injectors, and the remaps themselves will greatly speed up our training. Thus, we'll probably use less. Now we're ready to start sorting our list. Fortunately, Emon will help us get started. Clicking the primary column will sort the list by the primary attribute and help us take stock of what we have. In the case of our Titan alt, I could easily see that our skill queue was dominated by 2 main groups of skills: ship and gunnery skills that were based off of perception and willpower, and support skills which were based off of intelligence and memory. Now, if these blocks were larger, we could use a yearly remap to map out of them, but with the perfect remap plus 5 implants and cerebral accelerators, we're going to be training around 26 million SP a year. That means we can use a yearly remap for our first one, but we'd have to use bonuses after that. In fact, throw in skill injectors, and it looks like we'll be able to complete the whole enchilada in about a year. Not too shabby considering this used to take 2 to 3 years, but I digress. In this case, it looks like we're only going to be able to use 3 remaps, so we should plan accordingly. Naturally, we should pick the 3 biggest blocks. Everything else will be trained with skill injectors. And yes, we will have skill injectors left over after that, which we could put anywhere we want. But let's get these blocks in order. First off, we know that the intelligence and perception block has to go in front of the perception and will set, and that's because the former contains navigation skills that are prerequisites for Titan skills in the latter. But we also plan on staying alpha for as long as possible in order to make use of daily alpha injectors. Thus, we'll want to put the intelligence and memory block first. It probably won't contain 5 million SP worth of alpha skills for us to train, but it should get us rather close. Once we run out of things to train, we can go Omega and open up the rest of the block. And that leaves perception and willpower last, which might actually be a good thing. Once we finish our Titan training, we'd already be mapped for training ship and weapon skills for faction Titans. Oh, and do note that you can change the priority of skills in Emon, which helps tremendously with sorting. Now that we have our blocks sorted, we can assign remap points before each one. Since our blocks are rather homogeneous, we already know that the remaps should just be perfect remaps to the appropriate skills. However, we might sometimes need to make more heterogeneous blocks due to prerequisites or a lack of bonus remaps. For example, if we didn't have any bonus remaps, we'd need to combine blocks 1 and 2, and possibly even a few other odds and ends from the skill injector set, and then use Emon to determine the best attributes for training the whole block. Okay, so our plan currently looks like this. Fortunately, Emon automatically orders things based off of dependencies, so we don't have to worry about that. The only thing we have to do is to front load the alpha only skills, which should be pretty easy to figure out, so I'm not going to bother. One thing to note, however, is that the final block order ended up moving some skills to other blocks due to prerequisites. For example, jump portal generation is actually intelligence and memory, but it has some prerequisites based off of intelligence and perception. In this particular case, this skill would still train rather fast under an intelligence and perception remap, but it's also a good candidate for skill injectors since it won't train at the absolute maximum speed and will have plenty of injectors left over anyway. Alright, that should be it. Let's see what kind of difference we made. But let's also set the bar a little higher as well, so let's compare it to default and PI remaps. Oh, and I'm going to assume plus 5 implants, 120 days of cerebral accelerators, and 12 months worth of injectors from a single skill farm. And yeah, we would get a more accurate comparison if I left all that other stuff off, but I wanted to see something indicative of all these strategies together. Well, save for one. In order to make my calculations a little less complex, I assumed Omega all the way and no daily skill injectors. Okay, there was a bit of math involved and I may have missed a skill or two, but assuming I didn't make any major mistakes, this is a rather representative graph. Alright, this is looking pretty good. It did take me about 2 hours to make the plan, but the end result was 66 days saved over the default remap. And once again, you can see that the PI remap is definitely better than the default, but I think a couple of hours of planning to save an additional 40 days is well worth it. It even gets the total time down to under a year. Oh, And I wanted to shoehorn this in now since the daily logon rewards will be given unallocated SP. Just like the unallocated SP from injectors, it is best used on non-map skills in order to help offset the restrictive nature of remaps. I know it may be tempting to speed up whatever's currently topping your queue, but you'll be better off in the long run using it on slow training skills. Alright, that's it for part 3. Like I said before, I'm not going to cover the nuts and bolts of how to use Emon, as there are already written and video guides out there. Besides, there may come a day in which Emon is no longer supported, in which case you'll either need to find another program or make a spreadsheet to help you make and sort your list. Regardless, hope you guys now have an idea of how you can go about creating a plan. Of course, if you don't want to go through all that work, you can just stick with the PI or balanced remap. But those willing to pay a couple of hours up front will be rewarded with weeks and even months on the back end. So, instant gratification versus long-term reward and all that. Alright, one more part left. Until next time, don't forget to support all your favorite content creators and fly smart.